Call the meeting to order. Open with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first I'd like to thank everybody for coming to our meeting tonight. This is the December 4th meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And start with a roll call, please.
Mr. Boggs.
Here.
Mr. Epperson.
Here.
Mr. Begarow.
Here.
Mr. McGowan.
Here.
Mr. Davis.
Here.
Ms. Rogers. Here. Mr. Truax.
Here. So moving on the agenda here, we'll go to the item 4, old business, and the first item on the agenda, A, is application ZON-1804 to remain tabled. Any update on that, or?
I spoke with their attorney, I believe it was last month, that said they were working on getting things updated. So it sounds like they're still working on it, but I have yet to see anything.
Okay. Thank you.
Hmm?
All right, moving on then, that was our only old business item. In section 5, new business, item A, final plan application FP 19004 for Westport Homes.
Thank you, sir. As you mentioned, the applicant and owner are Westport Homes, or DR Horton Company. This is approval of final development plans for Broadmoor Commons phases 4 and 6. So the area map. So Broad Street to the north, we have Mink to the east. You can see the current construction and some of the existing homes of Broadmoor in the previous phases. So the new phases will be down in this area here. So quick history, the property was originally zoned to a planned development district in 1999. However, that plan that was approved expired due to lack of progress, so Westport had to just start all over with the preliminary plan. That was approved on May 4th of 2016. Broadmoor Commons overall is 274 lots, both single-family and attached two-family homes. Contains 5 reserve areas, 1 boulevard access off of Broad, and 2 sub-streets to adjacent properties. So here's a status update of where we are with the various phases of Broadmoor Commons. Phase 1 was approved in 2017, 54 lots that has been accepted and platted, and I think they're wrapping up construction of all the lots in phase 1 at this point. Phases 2 and 3 were also approved in 2017 with 84 lots that's currently under construction. Phase 5, the final development plan was approved earlier this year in April, 31 lots, that's also under construction, the infrastructure. 4 and 6, we're here tonight, and we're assuming a phase 7, if not a phase 8, at a later date. So as I mentioned, north is to the right on the map. This would be phase 4, and this would be phase 6. And as I mentioned, this down here would be phase 7, possibly a phase 8. So phases 4 and 6 has a total of 63 lots. Sub-area A is traditional single family. There's 28 of those. Sub-area B is detached lifestyle that's age targeted for 55 and older. There's 29 of those. And sub-area C is attached two family, 6 of those. So the single family portion is down here to the south. The detached lifestyle is in this area here, and then bookended by the two-family product on the sides. So street trees, they're proposed to be placed at every 50 feet. And the code requires every 30 feet, but they have received divergences from this requirement for the previous phases. Based upon the 50-foot spacing, they would have a total of 85 street trees. Replacement trees, there are none. If you recall, this requirement for the tree replacement was waived with Broadmoor 5 when they committed to constructing the walking path through the reserve. Planning and zoning had a couple comments. One, to include note K from the final plan for Broadmoor Commons Phase 5. And this would explain the lack of replacement trees due to the construction of the walking path. And then when a lot is on a curved street, the width of the lot needs to be placed at the building setback line. On the current plans, they have it on the front property line. So those will just be two updates they'll need to add. Public service mentioned that all engineering comments have been addressed and the plans have been approved and signed. Our process, preliminary plan, engineering plans, and final plan. So we're on the third stage of the process. He did mention there's no language for the stormwater facilities on the plat. This would be handled at the platting phase, which is much further in the future, so that'll be addressed at that time. The engineer had no comments on the final plan, but did provide comments on the plat, and again, that is handled administratively at a later time, so we'll address that then. Surrounding properties north is planned development district and general business, which is Broadmoor phases 1 and 3 and single-family homes. East is RD7, which is a farm field. South RD7 and planned development district, which is a farm field in Broadmoor phase 5. To the west is R20 and PDD, which is single-family homes and Broadmoor phase 2. The only modification we offer is that the applicant shall address all comments from the planning and zoning staff. And other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions from commission members for Scott?
I do have one. When does the light go, at what phase does the light out on Broad end up going to active?
From my understanding, talking with the public service director, it'll occur upon completion of the subdivision.
Okay. So it still will stay as yellow blinking?
Correct.
It's only a question I have.
Thanks. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Do we have a representative from the applicant? Okay. You want to step forward? I'll swear you in, and you can have an opportunity to add your comments. So, you swear that any testimony you will give in this matter will be the whole truth as you shall answer unto God? If you can start with your name and address, please.
It's Kyle Shreves with EMH&T, 5500 New Albany Road, Columbus, Ohio. And I'm just here to represent Ron Westport on behalf of Ron Westport. If you had any questions, I address them.
Okay, you had no
Nope.
comments other
Nope.
than that? Okay.
Yep, I just,
All right, we'll open it up for questions then from commission members. Start with Darren.
No questions right now.
Thanks. Dustin?
No questions.
Jerry?
No, sir, no questions.
Robert?
No.
Charlie?
No, sir, thank you.
Ann?
No.
That was easy. Okay, any members, do we have any speaker request forms turned in?
We do.
Okay, any questions from the audience on this application?
Could you go back to the first map?
Well, okay, if that's all you needed, you want to go back to the first map?
Can we do for the record, can we
Yeah.
swear in and name and address, just so there's a record?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I will need to swear you in. Do you swear that any testimony will give in this matter will be the whole truth as you shall answer unto God?
I do.
Okay, and if you name and address, please.
My name is Paula Olson. I live at 148 Broadmoor Broadmoor Boulevard, Pasco, Ohio. I just wanted to see where the other phrasing was because we couldn't get on the website to do it. I'm satisfied. It doesn't affect us.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, no other questions for the applicant? Do we have any deliberation, comments amongst ourselves? Anything need to bring up?
It's just a continuance of
It's a
the
continuance
project
of
and
the
get it completed, so.
Okay, if there are none, then.
I'll make a motion that we approve the rezoning application FP -19-004 with the two, FP 19-004 with the modifications stated.
Okay, thank you. You said rezoning, it's actually a final plan.
Final plan, I'm sorry,
Okay.
final plan. It said rezoning on the
Oh, okay. All right, we have a motion to approve the application. Do we have a second?
Second motion.
Charlie? Okay, thank you. Any discussion on the motion to approve? No? Roll call?
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Ms. Rogers?
No.
Mr. Bagerow?
Yes.
Mr. McGowan?
Yes.
Mr. Truax?
Yes.
Mr. Boggs?
Yes.
Mr. Epperson?
Yes.
That motion passes, and the application is approved. Okay, next item on the agenda is the code amendment application ZON 1906.
So this would be a code amendment to add chapter 1223 to the code for the distressed properties ordinance. So the purpose of the distressed properties ordinance is protect health, safety, and welfare, reduce the potential for economic decline, protect aesthetic standards, and preserve and protect property values. It would be applicable, and these are all the properties that are applicable to the grass and weed ordinance. So platted subdivision, commercial, multifamily, industrial, manufactured home, and all parcels 1.5 acres or less. So that's the exact applicability that we have for the grass and weeds. So it does not apply to those qualifying parcels I mentioned that are undergoing construction or repair, and this would be evidenced by an active building and or zoning permit, or in seeing them actively progressing to complete the construction or repair. So as long as they have a permit and they're working on it, no problem. So a summary of the maintenance standards would be to keep yards free of litter, maintain pools so as to not harbor mosquitoes, maintain exterior structures in good repair, and maintain exterior walking surfaces in good repair so as to not pose a danger. So in the past, we have had issues with folks having green pools with mosquitoes that we were unable to do anything about, so that'll help because we do get complaints on that. And then another one that we've gotten complaints on, for example, is Pataskal Square. We have nothing in the code that could address that, so these are focusing on some issues we've had and some eyesores, for lack of a better term, in the community that we've received complaints on but had no ability to act. And then we do have security standards, essentially secure vacant buildings so as to be inaccessible to wildlife and unauthorized persons. We have received several complaints from residents and the police alike that will find vacant properties where people are in there. So far, it's been a cooperative effort with property owners to get those secured, but if for whatever reason they chose not to be cooperative, this would give us the ability to make sure that those buildings are secure. Another provision in these regulations is an abatement plan. So for some properties, they didn't get in that condition overnight, and they're not going to be cleaned up overnight. So this is a person who owns a property or the person in charge can apply for an abatement plan with the Planning and Zoning Department. That plan, and this would be for repairs that are costly and or extensive, this would be agreed to by the applicant and the Planning and Zoning Department, and it would lay out a time frame for when these completions are going to be, or these repairs are going to be completed. The goal of the department is not to be punitive, but to seek a resolution for the issue. So we would work with them in order to get a resolution to the distressed property, and as long as they're proceeding per their abatement plan, there's no problem. We just check up on them, making sure things are going along, and there's no problem with that. We can grant extensions for mitigated or certain circumstances, and the only time that we would go through the normal code violation process is one, if they don't apply for an abatement plan, or two, if they are not adhering to the abatement plan, or they did not apply for an extension, then we would go back to the normal code enforcement process. The Buildings and Grounds Committee was presented to them on November 12th of this year, and was also recommended to proceed through the code enforcement process on that date as well. We did not receive any other comments, no modifications proposed. That, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you. Well, this is actually initiated from the city, so we'll kind of jump around in our process here. Do we have any public input on this application?
I think it's a good idea.
Me too.
All right, so then I'll go round robin on comments or questions for Scott, and start with Ann this time.
Okay. Well, I don't know if my questions would apply, some of them, but you can tell me if we have to go through another avenue. Well, one concern I have is the 1.5 acres.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to, I don't know how you came up with 1.5 as an arbitrary number. It's pretty small. I've seen properties that are bigger that are a disaster. So I'm not sure why they're excluded, because, I mean, I've seen 2-acre properties that are junkyards.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to raise that. That's one comment. As far as securing windows and doors,
Mm-hmm.
securing them could be with boarding them up. Is that considered temporary?
It would be temporary. It would be, we would look to them and say, okay, it's boarded up, it's vacant, and then see what the plan is, because if it remains vacant, it'll continue to deteriorate if they're not maintaining it. So let's board it up, lock the windows, lock the doors, whatever we need to do, whatever works best in that situation, but it would be a temporary solution until, it's occupied, the building's torn down, depending upon its state, but it's vacant, it could possibly further degrade, and then we haven't solved anything.
Okay. All right, so windows will eventually need to be replaced with windows and doors?
Correct.
Okay. And then, you know how some people think that tarps are a permanent solution to a permanent problem. And I'm not sure if that would be something that would be, I personally feel like we need to address tarps in the city, because they're everywhere, they're used for everything, and they're not, I don't know, it's just my opinion. But would that be something that we could consider adding to this, or would that be something that would be added somewhere else to the code? As part of what do we call that? Offensive to the census? Is that what it says in here? Is that the verbiage we used in here? I think that was the nuisance.
Number 2 on code.
Offensive to the census. So I wonder if that would be something that we would need to actually, is that something that would be included, or do we have to specify that would be something that's a temporary repair? Like if your roof is leaking, you cover it with a tarp, it's temporary, and you get your roof fixed. You don't leave it there for ever. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, in this instance, if someone had a tarp on their roof, clearly there's an issue that the roof could be leaking, so we would investigate and, hey, you have the tarp, it's been up here for a month, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
If it's determined that, yeah, the roof's leaking, we threw it up there a month ago, do you have someone coming up to fix it? No, then that would fall under these standards. However, if a tarp on the other side, if someone covering up a wood pile, covering up a riding mower, I think we're getting into an area that's outside of this chapter.
Okay. All right, we can address it some other way then. Okay, and then vehicles would be the same thing.
Vehicles would fall in another section.
Okay, all right. I think that's all I have. That's all.
Back to your first question though about the 1.5 acres, that,
Mhm.
you said this was the same standards that we used in the grass,
Correct.
that's how that came about,
Okay.
it's the exact same.
Well, we
Oh.
don't have to go with the grass standard. We can
That was-
increase it.
Just went Well, I'll let you address, answer that.
That was in the code previously. We updated the grass and weed ordinance to include platted subdivisions and expanded a little more. I know talking with council, we did say, what do you think about 2 acres? They were not comfortable with that. So my thought would be that if we were to up this to 2, 5, 10, whatever, I don't know that council would be comfortable with that. I don't wanna speak for council, but with going through the grass and weed ordinance, that was kind of their thought.
Do you have any idea what percentage that would be?
Percentage
Percentage
of,
of homes at 1.5 acres would cover?
I do not know.
Could it cover like 95%?
95%.
I wish it covered like 95% of the homes in.
Oh, in the city?
But it probably doesn't. Probably a lot of them.
Quite a few, but then we do have several, once we go up north, there's a lot of 2 acre and greater property, so, I think the intent with buildings and grounds was to start something, relatively basic that would address people that are, directly affected. For example, Pataskla Square, everybody drives by that, that's an eyesore. We can now address it. For example, if you're in a platted subdivision, your gutter's hanging off, it rains, it shoots water directly at your neighbor's foundation. This will allow us to say, hey, you need to fix it. So it's kind of starting small, seeing where it goes, and then it can always be expanded, retracted as necessary. But with a lot of code amendments, you have to try it to see how it works in real time.
Wouldn't most homeowners associations get on this first?
You'd be surprised how many homeowners associations will call us and ask us to do something. It's against their HOA rules. We had one recently that there was an issue with the HOA. Their attorney said that we need a written complaint from the person in the neighborhood. That nobody was willing to do that written complaint. So then it came to us and we explained we can go through this process, but it doesn't necessarily resolve your issue. So a lot of times HOAs will turn to us for help.
The sidewalks that it talks about, is that the city-owned sidewalks, or are we talking the ones that run from the city to the property?
It would be both. It would be both. Higher revised code also requires, our code currently requires in another section that sidewalks be maintained and repaired. It also goes back, that also references the Ohio Revised Code.
Okay, did we
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
satisfy that on how that came
Yeah.
about? So, and I think the key is their start with this and
Baby
adjust
steps.
as needed, or as experience shows.
Right, right.
Okay,
Thank you.
Charlie?
Scott, my question was going to be pertaining to the abatement.
Mm-hmm.
What challenges or risk is involved there?
I think it could be challenging to determine, you have a financial obligation, time frame that I think there could be an issue coming up with a resolution on what an appropriate time frame is, depending upon financial resources. That being the case, our goal is to not be punitive, so we would err more on the side of caution. But if someone says, give me 5 years and I'll fix my roof, I think that's a little ridiculous. But if you need to save up and it'll take you a year, but you're gonna get it done, I think we'd be willing to work with folks. And that's kind of our policy in the office, that, if we're working towards a resolution, not to be punitive. So there could be challenges with that, but I think we are more apt to work with folks to find a resolution than to say, well, you didn't do it, you had 2 months, you didn't do it, we're taking you to mayor's court. Because if it's a financial issue with financial resources, we take you to mayor's court, you're fined, you pay court costs, that's less money that can go towards fixing the problem. So that's kind of, we'd err on the side of working with folks and trying to get that squared away. So again, 5 years, too long. If it takes you a year, we can work with you.
That was my question.
Thank you.
My questions were
it's based on prior discussions, just to reinforce how enforcement philosophy would not be to set a quota and go out this, send an inspector out today to find 5 broken gutters or 5 doors that weren't covered or something like that. I mean, it's really based on complaints or obvious safety issues, that sort of thing.
That's correct. We have no intent to go and, analyze people's houses and drive around and try and police everything. It's more geared towards, again, I hate to go back to it, but Patasko Square, I think one everybody can agree with, that the problem property, that now we have the resources to go address it. And again, with complaints, if there's complaints, we'd go out and investigate, but we don't intend to be nitpicky, and because it talks about chipping paint, it has to be bad to really qualify for this, that we're not gonna say, oh, you got some chips here, you got 7 days to fix it. We're not gonna do that. I think it's more to fill in the gaps where we didn't have the resources to address these issues previously.
Okay, thanks. Gary?
Just a couple things. I do agree with Ann on the 1.5 acres, but I also agree with keeping it consistent. So I like starting there and then going from there, but just wanted to be known that I do agree with the thought of it being more just, I do agree too that if we do that, we need to look at everything and keep it consistent if we get low. On the tarps, you pretty much answered my question, because I know up in Shelby where my company is, that they had tornadoes come through and those houses had tarps on them for, my goodness, almost 8 months before they finally, and it was insurance issues that were being, so we're gonna take that all into consideration. But also on tarps, I think putting something in there about them being properly fastened. I like them being, I mean, I have one over my log splitter, but some
See,
people
it
don't keep them.
isn't so, Jerry.
Some people don't keep them properly fastened, which with
Is it
these
at
high
least
winds.
brown? Tell me it's at least brown.
Maybe you should do tarps according to your roof color.
With the high winds that we're getting anymore, it could be a hazard, because these tarps can fly around and hit people and everything. So just something about maybe being properly fastened when they are being used. That'd be my only input on that. And that's it.
Thank you. Justin?
Does this cover repair and state of parking areas?
We have that in another section of code that talks about, like, if the parking lot has potholes, things of that nature, we have it covered in another section of the
Okay.
code.
I was just thinking of Patasko Square, the parking lot is awful too.
We've paid them a visit on that a time or two.
Shakes all the mud off your
Yeah.
tires, correct?
Along with bolts and tires and everything, that's all I have.
Darren?
No, I kinda like it. As far as the acreage, if you're gonna up it, why don't you just get rid of the acreage? I mean, why
I
single
thought of
out?
that too.
Why just single out?
Why single out? Exactly, it's not fair. Everyone should have to abide by the,
Just get rid of the acreage. That's not.
yeah.
It's hard with farmers and agriculture. I mean, I know them, we're getting into a gray area.
Yeah,
I know what you're
people don't
saying.
complain.
I know.
I've seen a tarp from a neighbor's house at my mom's.
Is that mine coming at you?
Years. I don't care.
Well, I think the thought, because I know there was a similar ordinance proposed years ago that was repealed upon referendum. So I think council's idea is that we keep it consistent with the grass and weed ordinance and start basic, just so we have something in place. It could always, that acreage requirement could roll off and it could just say any property within the city, but I think their initial goal coming from buildings and grounds was to get something in place so that, we can address those outstanding issues and work from there.
If it'll make you feel better, I'm in a platted subdivision, but more than 1.5 acres, so it would apply to me.
Okay.
The tarp on your roof.
It's kind of an exception, though. I know most platted subdivisions don't have lots that large,
We shall come back to the TARP discussion someday.
and I have a tarp too.
You didn't take my tarp from Rick and I.
Mine's green, but
I spy something blue.
Any other discussion? If not, are we prepared, this is a recommendation to council?
Correct.
If we're prepared to act and entertain a motion.
I'll move that we recommend the approval for application number ZON-19-0008 pursuant to section 1217.10 of the Pataskala Code with no modifications, correct?
Okay, thank
For
you.
approval.
We have a motion to approve this application with no modifications. We have a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Dustin. Any discussion on the motion to approve? Roll call.
Mr. Epperson?
Yes.
Mr. Vagarrow?
Yes.
Mr. Boggs?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Truax?
Yes.
Mr. McGowan?
Yes.
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
That motion passes. What would this be on council's agenda? Probably January?
Probably February.
February?
Yeah, the beginning, we should be, because as I said, a minimum of 30 days. So we'll have all of, I'd say probably beginning of February.
Very good. Well, that was, those two, that concluded our new business section. Other business, we only have one item there, and that's to review the 2020 hearing calendar. Should have got copies of that, right? Anybody have any concerns about that? Not that we could change it too much.
Was the new one that was on our desk, was anything changed other than the fact it said Thursday under January 2nd?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
Everything else should be the first one. The first Wednesday of January is New Year's Day. So you can come in if you want, but we thought most people wouldn't want to.
Only if you're not testing.
You have to schedule it around football games or
Yes.
something. Okay. We don't actually adopt this tonight. That's the first meeting in January that we do.
That's correct, but we just kind of wanted to give you a heads up beforehand.
Anybody have any concerns or comments about that? Okay with it? Alrighty. Next item, number 7. Somebody to excuse me for being absent at the last meeting.
I've already spoken up twice, I'm not speaking up on this.
I'll make a motion we excuse Rick from the November 6th, 2019 meeting.
Thank you. We have a motion to excuse me from the November meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Rob? Any discussion? Roll call?
Mr. Truax?
Yes.
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Epperson?
Yes.
Mr. Vagarrow?
Yes.
Mr. Boggs?
Yes.
Mr. McGowan?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passed. Item number 8, approval of meeting minutes for November 6th. Everybody had a chance to review the minutes, and are there any additions or corrections? If there are none, then I will move that the minutes of the November 6th, 2019 meeting be approved as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jerry. Discussion on the motion to approve. Roll call?
Mr. Truax?
Yes.
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. Epperson?
Yes.
Mr. Vagarrow?
Yes.
Mr. Boggs?
Abstain.
Mr. McGowan?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Motion passes. Anything else that we need to discuss tonight?
No, sir?
No? Anybody?
Just one question, what's happening there on 310 just past all the drilling? What's that happening there?
Past the drilling,
Well, where they're doing the drilling, what is that they're drilling?
oil and gas well.
Oil and gas well.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
Are you, how long do you think before you'll have something regarding the historical district design standards?
Is that something that planning commission wants to pursue. Cause I would need a recommendation from planning commission to say, Scott, go do that.
Yes, I was requesting that.
That was in the last week's meeting, or
Last week's,
hearing, correct?
yeah.
Minutes?
It was in the minutes. You had to leave early.
And I moved it to new business, at the meeting. Or asked, I thought maybe it should go to, or that's when it should have been brought up, was under new business, correct?
If we can get a motion, a second, and then a vote to say, Scott, go do that, that's what I'll need.
It's the design guideline.
I think it's for, the old village area.
Yeah.
The packet we had last month.
Yeah, this would be a separate set of design standards for the old village.
Since it's kind of
Also
a
development
unique to
of the
itself,
design.
yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Cause you said we had what did you say we had for that area already?
There's a sign code
Sign code for that.
for that area, but it's,
Yeah.
McDonald's is included in that. It's an odd district, and it's not very well defined, cause in the zoning code, it looked like someone printed something from MapQuest and took a Sharpie and just outlined it.
Oh,
So it might be something we would need to,
Better define.
yeah, that would, better define, because I don't necessarily think McDonald's should be considered in the old village, but that's something that we can work to define on what the old village is. So we probably need to, boundaries, I think would be the first step, but that would be if I'm instructed to begin preparing those design standards, then I would, offer what those boundaries would be.
okay. So I can make a motion that we request that boundaries and design standards be defined for the old village, or what would be considered the old village area.
And then we'll need a second and a vote.
I'll second.
Was that your motion?
That was my motion.
Okay, do we have a motion on the floor?
Second.
Dustin, seconded, any discussion on the motion? Roll call?
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. McGowan?
Yes.
Mr. Epperson?
Yes.
Mr. Bigerow?
Yes.
Mr. Truax?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Boggs?
Yes. Motion passes. One more thing to work on, right?
Sorry, not sorry.
Well, it was good, what she brought up at the meeting, made a lot of sense, cause there wasn't any real design codes, and
Mm-hmm.
as Scott said, that he would have to have something on the table to be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much every town has a little historic district anymore. It would be nice if we could make sure it was maintained.
Should be just right there, right downtown.
Just right downtown?
There's just a small section by the tracks.
No McDonald's?
I mean, you have the Victorian homes there. It's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Yes, sir.
Tonight.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. Roll call?
Ms. Rogers?
Yes.
Mr. McGowan?
Yes.
Mr. Epperson?
Yes.
Mr. Bigerow?
Yes.
Mr. Boggs?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mr. Truax?
Yes.
Motion passes and we're adjourned.